Good morning, everyone. My name is Isaac Pillar, and I was born on the 10th of December 1932 in Amsterdam, Holland, to Rantje and Moses Pillar. I was the second child and the oldest son. My early childhood was a happy one, in a loving and close family. I was particularly attached to my mother, who was warm and very kind, and who had a lovely singing voice. One of the things that I remember most about her was that she was always singing. My father worked as a baker in a factory that specialized in making matzahs for Passover. As ours was a traditional Jewish home, I can recall pleasant Friday nights with the candles lit and a special meal. We also celebrated all the Jewish festivals with our large extended family. We had grandparents on both sides that we often visited. My paternal grandmother always gave me a cent to buy something sweet with. The money came from a pocket on a petticoat. My maternal grandparents had a diamond and gold shop. Both sets of grandparents were very loving, always ready with lots of kisses and cuddles. Aunts, uncles, and cousins were abundant, as both my parents came from a large family and we were all close. These memories are still stamped clearly in my mind. The school that Betty and I attended was a Jewish one, and I was happy there, good at my schoolwork, and I enjoyed learning. My mother, who was very caring and protective, would come in to meet us at school on freezing days, bringing socks with her to put over our shoes so that we would not slip and fall on the ice and snow on the way home. Our lives were those of the normal family, and sometimes I would play in the street with the other children from our neighborhood. Early in May 1940, the war began, when Germany invaded Holland. I can remember hearing the planes going overhead, but had no idea of what the war would bring. Everyone was saying this is war, but I was too young to comprehend. The children in the neighborhood were mostly my friends, and we often played all together in the street. One day, while I was playing innocently with a friend, I was very shocked when his father came up and slapped me in the face. He angrily said, "Stay away from my son, you little Jew." This was my first experience of being made to feel different, and as I had done nothing wrong, I did not understand his behavior. I was so upset that I ran to my parents, and although they consoled me, they could not make waves for fear of reprisal. A few weeks after this episode, my pet cat was killed, and his mangled body was left on my front doorstep. We were all very distressed and unable to understand that anyone could be so cruel to a helpless animal. Again, my parents could not do or say anything, as we were Jews, and they were petrified that more would happen to us. As time went by, the Jewish people became more and more isolated. We were made to wear the yellow Star of David, to readily identify us as Jews, and to set us apart. Parks bore signs which said, "No entry to dogs and Jews." The same for public transport. No Jew was allowed to use trams, trains, or buses. This made us a target of cruel taunts and ridicule. Food in wartime Holland began to be rationed, and we were not given coupons. I can remember that we lived close to a baker shop, and sometimes my mother would send me to get a loaf of bread. Often I was taken out of the queue, and then someone would grab me out of line and say, "To the back of the line, Jew." I did not understand why I was pushed out of line, and thankfully sometimes the lady in the shop handed me a loaf of bread and told me to go home. My father was still working and helping other Jewish people to get some of their belongings stored at neighbors or friends. For that he was paid in some food to bring home to the family. The corner shop was vandalized and looted. It was owned by an old Jewish man. I was there and saw a man being bashed. He called out to me to rush home, of course for my own protection. The roundup of Jewish people began in mid-March in 1942. Children and teachers were taken from Jewish schools, and if parents went to collect them, they were also taken away. Most people were initially taken to the concentration camp at Westerbork in the province of Drenthe near the German border. Our school was closed and my education in the classroom stopped. I was only 9 years old. Holland has always been a traditionally tolerant country. The Germans knew this, and they had forced a very strong Dutch Nazi party to help them with their work. This was the beginning of the time when fear ruled every day of our lives. We lived in a first-floor apartment, and I have vivid and terrifying memories of loud boots coming up the stairs to our door. The Germans came noisily up the stairs in groups of 4 to collect the Jews from their homes. I used to be so scared because when the doorbell or knocking came, as the eldest boy in the family, I was the one who had to open the door. My parents would quickly duck into bed, and I would have to tell these soldiers that my parents were very, very sick. The Germans were afraid of contagious illness, and so they would tell me that they will return soon, and then leave. I still see the fear in the eyes of my parents every time we heard the Germans on the stairs, and we had to keep our little siblings quiet. These memories still haunt me. Early each morning, my father would slip out of the flat to go and check up on family members who lived nearby. My parents were particularly concerned about the welfare of their parents. If he returned with bad news about some members of family, we all grew more fearful and apprehensive. One day he came back home with news that his parents had been picked up by the Nazis. His mother, who was partially blind, had been pushed down the stairs and hurt. His parents were sent separately to a concentration camp. Our home became our prison. We had no school, no entertainment, and very little to do. Our radio had been confiscated, and we had to be quiet at all times. There was no heating in our 3-bedroom home, and there was no one game enough to supply us with coal or anything else that we could burn. We suffered terribly from the cold. We were not allowed to go outside or look out of the window. We had very little food, and I remember always being hungry. I never saw my mother eat, and I think that often her share of what little there was to eat was given to the children. With 6 young children at home, I do not know how my dear mother managed with chores like washing, for it could not be hung outside, and with no heating it would have impossible to dry. She used to sing softly to us and taught us songs in Dutch, Yiddish and Hebrew. I still remember many of these tunes and songs today. My parents and grandparents used Yiddish expressions in these speeches. in their speech, and we had learned some Hebrew while we went to school. My mother was pregnant, and when she went into labour, we would stay with our ground floor neighbour. My brother was born and named Ronald, the only child with a non-Hebrew name and the only boy not to be circumcised in our family. The reason was there were no more rabbis left to perform circumcision. Daily we heard stories of whole family who had committed suicide by gassing themselves in their kitchens. My parents found someone in the Dutch underground that agreed to find people to take and hide some of their children. When Ronald was only 6 weeks old and my little sister Judith was 2.5, a man from the underground came to take them. My parents were absolutely beside themselves and could not stop hugging and kissing their little daughter and newborn son. Till this man, who they did not know, took them hurriedly away. The man that came for them had a frightening and fierce appearance, and we children were very afraid of him. We did not know why he took our siblings away. When they left our home, the crying was terrible. We were all grief-stricken, for we were not allowed to know where they were going, and we were afraid that we would never see them again. We heard no news of them at all. A relatively short time later, about a week, the man returned, and this time he took Hartog and Benjamin. Again, the separation from the rest of the family was heart-wrenching, and we all wept bitterly, not knowing if they were going to safety or to their death. 2 weeks later, the same men returned, and Esther and Betty were taken away. I will never forget the screams of my parents as they stood against the wall and saw their beloved children taken from them. Each parting was so traumatic. Shortly afterwards, before I was taken, a neighbour called and I was to go with my parents to his place early in the morning. The neighbour lived at the end of the street. On the way to his place, as we looked around, people were already dragging the furniture out of our home like scavengers. 2 evenings later, the same men returned to collect me, the last of their children. I was 10 years old and I did not want to leave my parents, and I made a fuss. They talked and cuddled me, and my mother said, "It will be all right. We will all be together again on your birthday." I could not take anything with me, but my mother gave me a little eraser and said, "You keep that. It's a lucky one." I still have it to this day. She said to me, "Go with this man. Go and don't look back." I did turn around, of course, and my last memory of my dear parents was to see them crying uncontrollably. For now all the 7 children were gone. I was told by the men not to speak, and as we walked along, the man gave me an apple, which I ate ravenously in a couple of bites. We then travelled on a bus, and I was again told not to talk, but to look straight ahead. I was in a completely strange and unknown place, and was taken to a young married couple. The woman did not want to risk taking me at all, but was talked into doing so. I felt unwanted, alone, and very frightening. The following morning, my rescuer returned, and I was given another name and identity. My name became Henk. I also had another surname. I was taken to a family of husband, wife, and 3 children, about 4 kilometers further away. I was there for about 3 weeks, and the husband was kinder to me than his wife. This would be a pattern throughout my time in hiding. The men were always kinder and more sympathetic, I found this very difficult, as my own mother had been so loving, and I craved a little warmth and affection from the women. I was completely separated from all members of a loving family, and at 10 years of age, missed my family terribly. The man's father had a farm, and a little Jewish girl named Judith, who was about 11 years of age, was hidden there. On my second visit there, Judith and I were given separate hiding places in case the Germans came, and we had to drill and practice hiding there. The Germans did come, and Judith began to cry in her hiding place. She was discovered and was taken away and shot. I was left in the hole for an unknown period, which felt like days. I felt abandoned, and this incident made me extremely afraid, and I was unable to speak for some time after this. After this occurred, I was hidden in an attic for 6 weeks, until someone else could be found to take me in. There were no stairs leading up to the attic. It was small and dark, and I was unable to stand up. I could see nothing, do nothing, and I cried bitterly every night. I was so miserable that I just wanted to die. The days were endless. I was allowed out of the attic only once a day in the evening to go to the toilet, and the woman brought me a little food. I was very hungry. While I was in the attic, it was my mother's birthday on the 28th of November. I asked the man to write a letter for me for her birthday, and he promised to do this. I felt sure that I would hear from her, but I waited in vain. When, after so many weeks, they had found someone to take me in, I came out of the attic. My eyes were badly affected, and I had difficulty adjusting to the daylight. My body was unnaturally bloated from malnutrition and lack of exercise. This was in December that I moved again, and I was taken on the back of a woman's bicycle for many kilometers to a different place. It was such a relief to be outside in the fresh air again. I was placed with a family, husband, wife, 3 sons and a daughter. They made fun of my bloated, malnourished look and put a rope around my waist to keep my pants up. I so much craved a little warmth and affection. A kind word or a hug would have made such a difference. On my first night with this family, I went and covered my head with my hand as they were saying grace, for I had no yolk. They all had a good laugh, and I was told not to do this again. There were prayers before and after meals, and I had to go to church with the family. I did not understand any of the service. No one was ever interested enough to ask what family I came from. I wanted to know where and how my family were. One day, I saw my sister Betty while walking to church, and I was not aware that my sister was living so close to me. And although I was not allowed to speak to her or acknowledge her presence, it gave me hope to know that she was alive. I was never asked about my family. There was no way to find out about how or where they were. I felt very alone and longed to be with them. My 11th birthday was on the 10th of December. This was soon after I had gone to live with this family. I did not tell anyone because I believed that my mother would come to get me, but she never came, as she had promised. Little did I know that she had already been guest in Auschwitz. In my grief, I thought she didn't want me anymore. I thought all the family would be together at home and that they'd forgotten about me. I did not want to live or celebrate my birthday ever again. On that birthday, I just went to bed and cried. I am in my 70s now and still do not celebrate my birthday. Naturally, I could not go to school, and when people came to visit, I had to go into my special hiding place on the second floor of the house. Beneath floorboards and cupboards, it was a very narrow space. I had to practice many times to go in and out of this spot. I also had to be very quiet. I could not move if I had wanted to. On the weekends, I was sent to various members of the foster family extended family, for safety reasons. But I dreaded this as I felt very unwanted and unwelcome at some of these places. One night, my foster father woke me up suddenly and told me that I had to run quickly and hide in the wheat field some 100 meters away, as the Germans were in the street and they were shooting. I was in my pajamas, barefooted, and it was bitterly cold. I was told not to stand up in the wheat and that I must just wait until he came to collect me and be as quiet as a mouse. I kept bobbing up as I was so scared, soaking wet and shivering with cold. After about 2 hours, he came to fetch me, and I cried and cried. He said, "Don't worry, sometimes I cry too." I could not believe that this big, tough man would ever cry. I still have nightmares about running, and the chill I caught then has given me long-term lung problems. While I was living with these foster parents, people threatened to betray me. My foster father was so angry that he in turn threatened them, and they would severely regret any betrayal. They must have believed him, as I was never found. At the very end of the walk, I discovered that my baby brother Ronald was living not far away, but too far to walk. I borrowed a bike. The woman who was looking after him was afraid and told me to go away. I pleaded with her, and she relented and let me inside. I played with him, and he did not want me to leave. Of course, he did not understand. I went back once more. I just wanted to see him, and I felt responsible for my little brother. Early in 1945, I was playing outside and won a game. The boy I had been playing with said spitefully, "You will never see your mother and father again." This shocked and upset me. After the war finished, I discovered that my mother had been gassed at Auschwitz on the 19th of November 1943, not long before her 33rd birthday. My father survived Auschwitz and returned at the end of 1945, but had lost both his feet, was an invalid, and he only lived for a few years. I've lost close to 150 family members in the Holocaust. Both sets of my loving grandparents, aunts, uncles, and all my dear cousins, including their babies. After the war, we children were told to meet up in Amsterdam. I met up with all my siblings when my father came out of hospital. This was the first time in 2.5 years since we had all seen each other. My father was too ill to take care of us, so we children had nowhere to go. Ronald stayed with the family who had looked after him almost from birth. Betty, who was then 15 years old, was helped in a job housekeeping. She worked 7 days a week for her board. Esther and Hartog went to an orphanage about 40 kilometers from Amsterdam. Judith was taken in by a family connection, and Benjamin went to another Jewish orphanage about 100 kilometers from Amsterdam. I remained with the foster family. I was allowed to stay with them only if I was agreeing to become a Catholic. I was not quite 13 years old, no family to go to. What choice did I have? I recommenced school. I had lost 3.5 valuable years of my schooling, and I worked very, very hard to catch up. I had a wonderful teacher who was a good and caring man and encouraged me always. He stayed back after school to help me with my work, and if not for him, it would have taken me much longer to catch up. He believed in me, and I wanted to show him that he was right. After 4 years of high school, I joined the army compulsory for 18 months. After this, I was encouraged to come to Australia with my foster family. Shortly after arriving in Australia, I met my lovely wife Wilhelmina, who is very supportive. We have 3 children, and now we have 8 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. We both worked hard to provide well for our children, but my health has been affected by my early deprivation. I do wish to say that I am extremely grateful to those step-parents and also to the people that saved my brothers and sisters, and they were very brave. The war years were very dangerous for everyone, and if you were caught harbouring Jews, it could cost you your life. I'm grateful that they were willing to take the risk. All 7 children from my family were saved, the only family in Amsterdam where all children survived. The biggest thank you goes to my parents for their unselfish act of handing us over so that we may have a chance of living. It could not have been an easy decision for them, but they would be proud to see all of their beautiful family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. After the war was a period of time that was very, very difficult for us, all of us, but I do remember myself that I was looking in all buses, trains, wherever there were people all together, I was looking to see if I could see my mother. I could just not believe that she would not come back. Nor my grandparents, not any of my aunts and uncles. No one ever returned. So that was a very, very difficult time also. Thank you very much. I would like to show a photograph of my family when we came back after the war, when my father was well enough to stand up there. Is that enough?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then one of my family 25 years later, when we went to Holland on a holiday, all my brothers and sisters. Then it took us well over 10 years to make a family tree, and I brought some of it here, and all the red spots in here are the people that disappeared. That was the family that all disappeared.
That's only one side.
That's only a part of it, yes. I've got a booklet here with the gentleman on it that took us all away, 2 by 2, and of course. Right. I've got a book here of all the pillars that were killed in the Second World War. It's full of the names with the pillars and so forth. They're all from the Pillar family. And I've got a book here with 104,000 Jewish people that were all killed in the camps. If it wasn't Auschwitz, it was Sobibor. And I've got a piece of paper on where my mum is there too, but I won't open it. All right? That's what I wanted to show you. Thank you very much.